Live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
G.I.Joe, the very best, Americas Elite. Eliter than all the rest, trained to have no flaws. Defending liberty across the land, valor oversized. Bring out that big brass band, real heroes verified. Gotta read them all, you must agree. Elitist in history, G.I.Joe. Oh, there could be no end in a world we must defend. G.I.Joe, gotta read them all. A courageous crew. Their colors red, white, and blue. Mess with them and they'll shoot you. G.I. Joe. Gotta read them all. Gotta read them all. Yeah.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe Comics podcast. If you are new to the show, you can find out all the details over at the website, talkingjoe.co.uk. If you are old to the show, make sure that you've remembered to leave us a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice, that you're subscribed over at YouTube, that you are a member of the Facebook group, that you're following us on Twitter and Instagram, and do feel free to just give us a shout. Why not? So we are back again, like a renegade master, talking about Devil's Due. So we've had a bit of an aside quest into the various Devil's Due miniseries that were coming out in the Disavowed Americas Elite era. But we've covered all of that. We're back into the main event, covering G.I. Joe, where we picked off with Americas Elite issue 21 through to 24, which were coming out March 2007 through to June 2007. This is the 4-parter story, Sins of the Mother. For those reading along in trade collections, this was collected in the 2007 Americas Elite trade paperback 4, which was called Truth and Consequences, which collected 19 through to 24. And that same volume essentially was reprinted as the Americas Elite Volume 4 from IDW a little later on. Phew. Now, with all of that preamble, let's welcome my co-host. It's a real American mother. It's Tim Finn.
I thought you were going to say it's a real American sin. It's Tim Finn.
Well, shall I do that again?
That's okay.
He's a dog. Honestly. He's a sin. It's Tim Finn. That was kind of Pet Shop Boys thing going on there. Okay. How you doing?
I am well. It has been such a long time since we talked about a regular in continuity Devil's Due G.I. Joe. Well, that's not true. We just did Special Missions, The Enemy. But I feel like there have been so many Skybound G.I. Joe comics that even though we did do a Transformers crossover from Devil's Due and that Special Missions, it feels like it's been 6 months.
Yep, drat that Skybound for releasing so much content that they've taken us slightly off course. We were so close. We were in the final furlong of the Devil's Due era, and then sort of have kind of gone a little bit slower than we were going with all of these amazing new comics from Skybound. But there we go.
The other way of saying this is that in that year, after IDW stopped making G.I. Joe comics and before Skybound did, we were doing so many episodes and interviews about Devil's Due. It felt a little like we were sort of permanently stuck in the past because, there was no new material and when could we ever come back to the present day? But it was also really fun to be so focused on a stretch of publishing history.
Absolutely. And even before that, in the final sort of few months of the IDW era, they were just putting out generally one issue of G.I. Joe a month. We also had the Saturday morning adventures, in that phase as well. But it was mostly just one issue a month, and sometimes they might skip a month. So we had a lot more space to be focusing back on the Devil's Due era.
Yeah.
So last time we were on the main series, we had just covered The Emperor's New Clothes, which was a 2-issue arc, issues 19 and 20, which were written by the editor Mike O'Sullivan, and that was really just a postscript to the previous run by Joe Casey, sort of closing a lot of the kind of ongoing threads there. And we are, picking up with a brand new team with this one. So just to position ourselves in the continuity, where are we? So Baroness had previously appeared to die in a plane crash in Devil's Due issue 39. That was back in the Brandon Jerwa writing era, just after she had told her husband Destro that she was pregnant. Then later on, she appeared in a secret prison in the basement of what they call it. It's not the pit, it's
The Rock.
The Rock. Can you smell what The Rock is cooking? No, I can't, because I'm in the basement in this hermetically sealed prison. And we also found out that she had given birth, and that Cobra Commander had ordered the capture of the Baroness's child. And the Cobra mission to do that is detailed in some detail in Special Missions The Enemy that we just covered. And then the Baroness had escaped from The Rock during the Phoenix Guard attack in the finale of Joe Casey's America's Elite run. So that's where we are now. All coming back to you, Tim?
Yes, thank you for that. I think I do have, when I tee you up with a question like Mark, I'm seeing this in this story. When did we last see so-and-so? I think I do have 2 of those as we get through these 4 issues, but that is helpful.
So this issue and most of the issues running up to the end of the Devil's Due era are brought to us by a new creative team. So that the driving force of that being writer Mark Powers and artist Mike Baer. Script is Mark Powers, pencils Mike Baer, inks Clayton Brown, just for issue 1, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. Colors Jean-Francois Beaulieu. He creates quite the tapestry with his colors. Letters Brian Crowley, military advisor Phil Kost, and editor, aka commanding officer, aka chief of staff, aka commandant, aka supreme emperor, is Mike O'Sullivan.
I think that second to last one is Commandant.
Thank you, Tim. And those creative titles are listed in the credits over the course of these 4 issues. So let's talk about the creative team a little bit. So Mark Powers was an editor over at Marvel. Then he came to Devil's Due as an editor. He served as editor for the G.I. Joe title from issue 31 or so through to America's Elite issue 4. He also was editor for some of the mini series around that time. So Snake Eyes Declassified, Master and Apprentice, and so on. So he's sort of come back from being editor with a new hat as writer. So Mike O'Sullivan, the current editor for these issues, his former boss was Mark Powers, and now he's pretty much the boss. And they've talked about having a great working relationship. And there's a few interviews with Mark Powers, and I'll just call out a couple of things that he mentioned. He said that he had sort of thrashed out the high-level plot working with the editor, Mike O'Sullivan. And at the point of this interview, sort of promoting the launch of issue 21, he said that they've got issues written through to issue 26 already and plotted out through to issue 36. And after that, we've got ballpark plans. So not all of those plans necessarily given the space to see fruition, but he's clearly there thinking about the long-term kind of arc and run and how things are going to play out. And talking about some of the things he'd like to see and how he sees the characters, he said that, "I'd like to see Cobra Commander more dangerous than ever before, and the Joes as badass in opposing to him that we'd ever seen. I'd like to see the conflict ramped up, and I want to see how various relationships are put to the test because of these things." We're going to see more of how Cobra Commander continues to build this violent movement. He's not just some homicidal nut in a hooded mask. He is a complex, cunning individual, one of great ambition, and that's going to be more apparent than ever before in the next year. I think readers have seen enough of Cobra getting their asses handed to them way too easily.
No, that's great. I like that take on Cobra and Cobra Commander, and I do see it reflected in this 4-part story, and was feeling it.
Then on to the new artist, Mike Baer from Stanwood, WA. What's that stand for?
Washington State.
Near Seattle. At this time, he was just 22 years old, and he was another graduate of Savannah College of Art and Design, recruited by Mike O'Sullivan. That is definitely a feeder program for Devil's Due, as we've seen. Many of the creators have come with a background at Savannah. Prior to this, he did a 9-page story insert for the Special Missions Tokyo book, which was the story of Major Blood versus Recondo, a plot point that actually does get followed up in these issues. And looking at that story versus these issues, it's apparent to me that his art has really come on in the intervening time. That it's looking a lot more polished, let's say.
Yeah, this is very good work for someone who's new to comics. I'm looking at Mike Baer's website, which is bearmantooth.com. Bear like grizzly bear, and tooth like the thing in your teeth. Bearmantooth.com. And now he is an animation artist who's worked on shows like Spider-Man and the 2017 series, and Rick and Morty and Animaniacs, background designer, background painter, character designer, additional designer, and he's worked on a video game or two. And his stuff is unrecognizable in a good way. Now his stuff is completely transformed. It's so much more now about color and shape and cartooning, and he's someone now who can draw in many different styles. And I don't know that he would ever come back to G.I. Joe, but, there are artists who draw comics, they draw G.I. Joe, and then, maybe some years later they come back. Rod Wiggum drew issues in 1985, and then he came back and he drew 3 issues in 1991. And, he did a couple trading cards in 2024 for a big Kickstarter. Mike Baer is someone who, if he was to come back and draw G.I. Joe, I think he could draw in a traditional American adventure style for comic books. I think he could draw in something that looks kind of like how he drew G.I. Joe right out of college. But his stuff is so different now. It's remarkable.
And as well as doing these issues through for this arc and through World War III, he also did some work for Hasbro as well. He did some of the card art. There's a Resolute box art, the article that I found, and I was also surprised to see at Joe Fest this year they had a case with some of the sort of unproduced comic book packs, and there was some of the art that Mike Baer had produced for those of, I think it was included like a winter suit Cobra Commander and that kind of thing. You probably had a little nose at that yourself, Tim.
Yeah, Peter Hubner, who is one of the guys behind Joe Declassified, walked me through the art at the booth at Joe Fest, because the art is in his personal collection. This was package art for later 25th anniversary figures and Resolute toys. This is in the 2000s and the 2010s. This stuff was pencil art on paper and red pencil on paper, and the color, the digital paints were added later by someone else. So what we see in these actual finished toy packages are, Mike Baer in collaboration with someone else. But it's really fun when there's that crossover where someone who works on the Joe comic also works on the Joe toy, which has happened so few times. And, you'd think that with, styles or sort of corporate synergy, that would happen a lot. And it does not happen a lot. It has happened more for Transformers in the last 20 years, where guys who draw the comic for Dreamwave then started doing a lot of package art for Hasbro. But it's one of those things where, Hasbro's over here making toys and they're finding their artists, and comics publisher A or B is over there and they're making comics and they've got their artists. And, sometimes they're only in the same room at a toy convention or a comics convention.
And I think in part it might be driven by the link that Devil Dew had this sort of separate kind of licensing company, Kanoichi, that was producing, some of these materials and being essentially the same company, that they would be using some of the same people to do work both in the comics world, but also in this kind of external kind of consulting and artwork production world.
And Mike Baer does do a little bit other work in comics. He did a little bit of Voltron for Devil's Due. I think he did a little bit of stuff for Zenescope somewhere around here. But his 14 issues of G.I. Joe really is his sort of stamp on comics. And from then on, it's video game work and TV animation work, which I think pays better. So, if someone goes to one of those other fields and doesn't come back to comics, I don't blame them.
What is surprising is quite how little that he did prior to this run, and then how little he does subsequent to it in the world of comics. Okay, let's move on to some covers, shall we?
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
Yeah, so I'm going to say it, and then you can tell me I'm wrong. These 4 issues had no variant covers. Huh?
I think you're right. Yep, I think these ones didn't have any variants.
So the first 2 are drawn by Clémence Sauvé and colored by Stéphane Peru. And this is these are both very cool, well-drawn, well-composed covers, and there's this element of sadness to them because both artists passed away. Sauvé died in 2011, and Peru died in 2008. These start to remind me of Dave Johnson in their composition and in their styling. Sauvé has such a strong sense of black ink and shape and design. And if you covered up the bottom half of the cover to issue 22 and you showed me that wraith, I would say, oh, is that Dave Johnson?
Mm-hmm. And a bit of Kevin Nolan I see in there as well.
Mm-hmm. Cover to 21 is the Baroness right in front of a wanted poster of herself, of her head, front and side view, and she's there's a spotlight illuminating her and that brick wall with the poster. And notably in these 4 covers, also the interiors, she does not have a Cobra logo on her costume. She does not have a red Cobra symbol on her chest. So it's her because she's got long, straight black hair and glasses, and she's wearing black leather, black armor. The cover to 21, I think, is inadvertently a reference to Marvel issue 116, which is a Michael Golden cover, part 1 of Destro Search and Destroy. Speaking of Rod Wiggum coming back to draw G.I. Joe, which was a Michael Golden image of Destro in a similar pose in front of a Destro wanted poster. The camera angles on them were a little bit different. With Destro, were a little bit more perpendicular to the wall. Actually, maybe it is a specific reference. And then the cover to 22, the Baroness is standing full body in front of an oversized, bullet-ridden concrete and rebar. I don't know what this is, actually. It looks like an oversized grave, an unmarked grave, but it also just looks like a sort of a small obelisk or part of a building. And I see a bunch of other concrete and rebar around and sort of silhouettes behind. She's holding 2 gigantic under and over M16s, like what Leatherneck comes with in 1986. And then sort of floating, sort of standing above her, behind her, is Wraith, the stealth mechanical suit Cobra freelance assassin with a knife, and he is his head is visible and sort of in a gradient going down his body. He is less visible and sort of blending in transparently to the space behind him. Baroness is looking away from him, so there is an element of surprise.
22 is a really cool image, and I do love it, but I'm not entirely convinced that the fairly slight Baroness in this image could easily sort of shoulder those rifles that she's carrying and fire them.
Yeah, I remember it might have been when the movie Barbed Wire was released in theaters. Someone said to me, and it might have been my brother who knew military stuff because he read books and magazines. Someone said, you really can't hold 2 pistols at once and fire them with any accuracy, one in each hand. And that's a thing that tough people in movies do. And it looks great. And in movies, you can show a shot of someone firing and then you can show a shot of someone else getting hit. But in real life, that wouldn't happen. And I will extend forward from that someone cannot hold a regular person, a big, beefy military person, much less the thinner Baroness, cannot hold 2 machine guns at the same time and use them. But it does make for a cool cover. And if covers are just, an exaggeration of what happens inside and a tease of what happens inside, it's totally fine.
Yeah, I was trying to remember the word debris. It was taking me entirely too long, but I think that's what I'm thinking of in this background. It's kind of like some sort of wreckage of twisted concrete following some sort of military confrontation.
Maybe it's sort of just a foundational structural piece of a larger building. The cover to 22. All right, so the covers to 21 and 22 are really high-level, professionally done in terms of technique and composition. And in subtle ways, 23 and 24 are not as successful. They are well drawn and they are well or pretty well composed. But these are definitely drawn by someone who does not have as much experience and strength in composing for a single rectangular image, a cover, and then drawing an image as a cover that's going to fully command your attention. So 23 is Baroness and Flint in free fall, grappling. 8/10 of the sky behind them, of the background, is just light blue sky. There's a charter jet flying away from them high up. She's got a knife, her glasses have fallen. And then in the bottom right of the corner, and there's some clouds on the bottom right of the corner, you see a little bit of Earth with a little bit of the curvature of Earth. You see both water and like continents. And this is a fun cover because, you're always worried if your hero or your beloved villain are falling and definitely don't have parachutes. Their actual poses, good, not the best. And I don't love the cropping of Flint's leg off on the right side.
This cover 23 is also it's touching on something that sort of similar that happens in the issue, a confrontation between Baroness and Flint on a plane, but definitely doesn't happen on the interiors.
Yes, they do not fall out of the plane. She doesn't kick him out of the plane. One of them doesn't jump out of the plane with a parachute or a jetpack. This is a complete invention, though it's related to a scene. And I should say, these two covers, 23 and 24, are drawn by Mike Bair.
Yeah, so Mike Bair, I found a comment from Mike Bair about this cover. He says, my first cover, originally drawn by Clement Soivet, who is awesome, by the way, but for some reasons he was required to redraw it, but was not able to. So I was offered to do this. So there's the story behind it. There's an unpublished cover from Clement Soivet for this issue 23. Maybe Baroness's boobs were too big. Maybe there were too many guns being pointed at people. Who knows?
Maybe one of those heavy-duty art collectors who we have interviewed on the show knows more about that piece of art, because we have met a fan or two of Clement Soivet. Thank you if I'm getting that pronunciation wrong. Cover to 24 is Cobra Commander with his hood, somewhat backlit. He's a little bit dark, a little bit larger than life. We see 2/3 of him from his knees all the way up past his head to his upreached arms. He's holding puppet strings, and in front of him are Destro and the Baroness with puppet strings tied to their necks and wrists. And there's no background. There's just a light source behind Cobra Commander. So there's this very desaturated yellow behind him with some yellow rim light on Cobra Commander's arms and head. And Destro and Baroness are sort of puppeteered, sort of rushing each other as if to, punch and strangle each other. And Cobra Commander's looking at us. And similarly, this is a great idea for a cover. Composition is, it's good. The actual drawing, the actual anatomy lacks a little tension and oomph, and is part of my larger comment about Mike Bair's art, which we can talk about after you read the plot breakdown.
Plot breakdown.
In a flashback, we see that 14 months ago, a pregnant Baroness somehow survived the plane crash that Cobra Commander had engineered. She is betrayed by Wraith, who turns her over to General Gibbs of the Jugglers in exchange for a pardon. In the present, the Baroness has escaped her jail cell in the Rock and is hunting for her baby. She finds Scalpel and tortures him, and the Joes later find him barely alive. Next, the Baroness finds and hires Major Blood. Blood and Colonel Sharif have an attack on an oil refinery in Saudi Arabia as a ruse to distract the Joe team while Baroness continues her quest. Over in Scotland, Destro acknowledges his son Alexander as his heir, but Cobra Commander contacts Destro about the missing presumed dead Baroness and her and his baby. He drops everything and leaves to go to Cobra Commander. Back with the Baroness in Prague, she has found Wraith. They fight in a cemetery and she kills him. Continuing the hunt for Cobra Commander, the Baroness finds Wilder Vaughn of the Red Shadows, swapping the Wraith armor for the current location of Cobra Commander in Honduras. Flint, who had been tracking Vaughn, who was behind the murder of his wife Lady J, abandons that hunt and follows the Baroness instead. The Baroness tracks down and confronts Cobra Commander. Destro stands between them. Spirit and Snake Eyes have been tracking Flint to that same destination, and the plots all join together. Cobra Commander forces Destro into turning over control of Mars and also his firstborn son, Alexander, to Cobra Commander in return for his newborn son, who has been hidden away in a secret panel of the room that Cobra Commander is in. The Joes are held at gunpoint and unable to intervene. Hours later, Cobra Commander is by himself studying the schematics of Destro's army. A Cobra trooper enters to report that the base is ready to evacuate. He then questions Cobra Commander about the decisions that he had been taken. Cobra Commander says that he is victorious because he knows the true names of every Joe and their tactics, as well as now having control of Destro's resources. He has lost nothing, and he executes the Viper for his insolence. So, Tim, a lot's going on in these 4 issues, a lot of ground to cover. Where do you want to start?
I want to applaud Mark Powers for 3 or 4 things. One, a really great storytelling technique where scenes bounce back and forth between... there's parallel storytelling where half the story takes place now and half the story takes place as flashback as the Baroness makes her way to where she is now, with the flashbacks moving from a long time ago to more recently. Do I have that right? To reveal what she's been up to and all the places she's been and deals she's made and people she's harmed to get to be able to confront Cobra Commander. So having this A-B storytelling would already be neat, like flashback, present day, flashback, present day. But the flashbacks, they feel like they accelerate. So that's cool.
I must admit, I was a little bit disorientated by the very first flashback in issue 21. And part of it I think is that it sort of starts with the text Cobra Island 14 months ago, with 14 months ago being in relatively small text and sort of quite close to the gutter. So I had initially missed that was actually a flashback. But it, I figured it out. Slightly disorientated though by it initially.
Yes, I do think that color artist Jean-Francois Beaulieu could have differentiated the flashbacks from the present day more, but I don't think didn't fall down on the job in not doing so. Another thing I like about Mike Powers' work here is he writes a really mean, motivated, convincing Baroness, and he writes a very smart and broken Destro, and he writes a very mean, convincing Cobra Commander, and so I think he's got the characters down. Number 3, he uses a lot of characters, and another way of saying this might be sort of my 4th point, which is these 4 issues feel meaty and satisfying in a really striking way, while also being sort of another epilogue to a previous story and also a prologue to the next story. And yet, because I think Powers has a good take on this and because he has so many pages to play with, I feel like in some of the more stressful times at Devil's Due before this or after this would have been a 2-issue story, and you and I would be saying, this seems so rushed. But considering how transitional this story is, considering how many kind of obscure characters this has, like Wilder Vaughn and Scalpel, and like brand new characters like the general that Hawk talks to for 1 page, and considering how many sort of minor characters here, that test that I think of, like, could I hand this story to someone who hasn't read comics before or G.I. Joe before? What would they think? I think a lapsed G.I. Joe fan would be able to follow this and would enjoy it, even if they'd have a lot of questions. And that's not something that I feel about a lot of any 4 issues of G.I. Joe.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's sort of it's definitely sort of continuing and kind of acknowledging what has come before, being part of that wider continuity. It's a satisfying 4-part story in its own right, and then it's also setting up what is to come next. And at the same time, it has got a large cast of characters and locations without feeling overcrowded. And there's a lot that happens as well. I did a quick note, sort of one of my notes was that it's really globe-trotting. that we're in a lot of different scenes and a lot of different countries, that we're in Vietnam, Honduras, Saudi Arabia, Scotland, Prague, Switzerland, as well as Nebraska and Brooklyn, and probably more.
I do want to ding writer Mark Powers for a line of dialogue in the third chapter. This is page 3 of the third chapter, when a bunch of Joes are at an oil refinery in Saudi Arabia, and they're shooting everywhere in the middle of an oil refinery. And Duke says, "Keep up the fire. If they detonate explosives here, it'll make Hiroshima look like a campfire." And my response is, nope. Mm-hmm. Do not approve of that line. I don't approve of the logic. I don't approve of the comparison. I also, I'm a little unclear on the safety and the logic of firing automatic weapons in the middle of an oil refinery, which several Joes continue to do in several other parts of the refinery for the next several pages. But, okay, so that's, but, 4 very good things and, one word balloon that made me roll my eyes more than halfway through the story.
Yeah, I really liked it. That's my high level. I thought that it was as I say, it's sort of a great sort of self-contained story. I thought the art was, really, really strong, really, really good, particularly sort of, given that he's such a young and inexperienced guy at this point in time. I thought the story was really gripping. The dealing with the characters was, it felt like they'd really got the characters as sort of, and talking to that sort of mission statement about Cobra Commander being, sinister, nasty, etc. I think that's a real threat. I think they dealt with that really well. I thought probably the first issue looked the nicest. This is the one that had additional inks. You mean, or did it just have inks? It was the inked issue with inks by Clayton Brown, whereas the others were going from direct from pencils. And there was a comment that I saw about, from the artist Mike Bear, sort of acknowledging how useful it was to have a strong inker on his first issue, and and I sort of saw a comment as well about that page in the first issue where there's a close up of Crocmaster version 2 sort of firing that gun with some good force perspective. And he said that this page was done in one day. I spent half the day drawing the gun, erased it, and then drew it again. And that's the one you see here. The second one was much quicker, and I'm glad I made the change. The gun is still probably the best one I've drawn so far because of the perspective. It's difficult to fully put your finger on it, but it's a lot more substantial. And I think having a tag team of a strong inker with a penciler does sort of tighten it up and give you that extra 10%. Yeah, it just gives it a bit more heft.
It's not just heft. It's also heft is about weight and physical presence. And
polish is probably the other.
Yes, and then polish, that's about a graphical presentation that, when I see a comic, comics can be drawn all ways. They can be painted, they can be pencils only, they can be, there are artists who barely pencil and they just really draw with ink, like Eric Larson. But generally, because comics are penciled and inked, and I understand that with digital tools, the line between penciling and inking kind of gets blurred, because a pencil artist drawing in Procreate or, Photoshop might be, in effect, penciling, finger quotes, in black, and then if they get it right, they don't have to draw over that line a second time. But the graphical present, when I read a comic, I generally expect to see some kind of clean line, and you can have an inker with a lot of character, like Klaus Janson. You can have dry brush, like Mark Schultz on Xenozoic Tales. You can have textures, Zipatone or sandpaper taking ink away, or like whiteout if something's like raining or whatever. But generally I expect to see some kind of clean line where the like slightly scratchy pencil line has been drawn over with a clean ink line, even if then the color artist like knocks back that line in some other color, like a highlight or something. And so to have pure black on a page, as you do in the first issue of this story, visually weighs down the page. I'm not talking about the heft of a character like a 200-pound man in the jungle. I mean like the actual shapes on the rectangle of the page, the rectangle of the panel, and balances all of the colors. And if you don't have any pure black, the colors can overwhelm the artwork. And in other episodes, we've talked about this, and there's some good examples out there in comics land. And to his credit, Bear does a very good job in the next 3 issues of keeping his pencils tight and drawing with a sense of line weight, so that there are thick lines and there are thin lines, and it's not all over the place. And he's not like he's waiting for an inker to come fix it or clean it up. He's working things out at the pencil stage and presenting them very, very well for colorist Beaulieu to then, quote, finish. But that first issue is just, it's just prettier. I think you said the word polished.
Yeah, I think there's it's sort of working from the pencils as well. It sort of introduces a slight murkiness to the final product.
In a good way or a bad way, or just an interesting way?
In an interesting way, let's say. It's not necessarily bad, but yeah, it definitely has a slight feel, slightly different feel to it than alternative.
I mean, we can compare the first issue to the second issue, and a better comparison with my magic wand would be to compare a page with the same pencils and colors, inked and not inked, colored straight on the pencils or colored on inks that are inked on the pencils. And I don't think that exists. So here we can't make that comparison. Like mentally in my brain, I can see the two and I can say, yes, I like the one with inks more. And I'm not blaming this on Bear. I'm a year and a half or 1 year away from the end of Devil's Due's time on G.I. Joe, right? 2001 to 2008. And we have already heard from, I think, Blaylock and an editor in previous episodes of Talking Joe that coloring from pencils only was a way to save money and maybe also a way to save time. So symbolically, what I see here is the beginning of the end for Devil's Due. Like, okay, they're going to have this big 12-part story, and I know a lot of people really like this story. I've actually never read it, although I do know what happens at the very, very end, and I am looking forward to it. But, this is not the Salad days of, Reinstated with a J. Scott Campbell cover, and being like the number 2 seller. At this point, sales are like 15,000 copies per issue. Okay, so Bear's doing pencils because he's not being given an inker, and he does a good job with it. His storytelling is clear. He draws good faces. He understands facial anatomy, noses and cheekbones. He draws interesting camera angles. His stuff is not flat. It's not boring. He does acting where people are just talking. He does fights. He does a little bit of vehicle stuff, although maybe the one element that is very G.I. Joe that Mark Powers doesn't bring into this story is G.I. Joe vehicles. We do see the stealth, the X-19 Phantom. We do see the stealth for one page, but there isn't any like scene with a vamp and a ram and a snowcat. Bear's art, the way that he draws everyone. I'm just going to read this sentence from my notes because I think I phrased it here well. Bear's storytelling is still good, but none of his figures have heroic heft or exaggerations. Their proportions and lack of dynamic tension make them all look like college sophomores. And I can be a little more specific here. There are many panels throughout these 4 issues where his heads are like 5% too big, or his bodies, like neck down, are like 5 or 10% too short. And I'm not saying that to pick on his actual anatomical skills as much as I'm saying the tradition that it looks like he's taking from in drawing this action comic is not the American superheroic tradition. I don't see Jack Kirby, Gil Kane, John Buscema in here. I don't see a lot of tension in muscles. I don't see men and women who are like 8 heads tall. You know, like in How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, the point is made that realistic humans are 7.5 heads tall, but in superhero comics, you draw them 8.5 heads tall. And then in fashion illustration, you draw them 11 heads tall.
I would I'd kind of almost describe what he's doing as is sort of like a bit more cinematic rather than comic booky, if that makes sense.
Okay. Keep going.
And the artist actually described him, one of his areas of interest in drawing is sort of acting a bit like a director and finding interesting shots and angles to position, I guess, his camera as he's drawing. There is no camera, there is no picture, but as he's drawing it, and it's kind of in that slightly more realistic, slightly less exaggerated kind of style.
But I think you can do both. I think you can have comics that are, quote, cinematic, while also having a little bit of exaggeration on camera angles, on poses, on equipment. And, when it's something like Hawk and some general in the Rock in front of a, wall of computer screens just talking, and someone's got their hand out and someone's pointing, like, well, what do you mean? We should do this. Yes, sir. It doesn't need a lot of that extra oomph. But, there's a page in here, I forget if it's chapter 2 or 3, where Snake Eyes is jumping and kicking, and it feels like someone photographed an action figure and traced it. And what I really need there is, a leg that's longer than a regular leg and a foot that's bigger than a regular foot. And I see that throughout these 4 issues. So good storytelling, handsomely drawn, but it's lacking that spice, that sauce.
Should we get onto some story points?
Yeah.
Death of Wraith. We talked before about death of characters and that maybe it's a shame that they're taken away off the boards. I mean, we only have beyond this point another 12 issues to play with, so it's not like he would necessarily have been around for a lot longer anyway. But I guess it gives him a good last hurrah. An alternative to not having an interesting death is that the character doesn't even get used at all. And in this case, Wraith, a lot of Wraith is a suit. So we see Baroness in that same suit, and the suit is given to another character. So perhaps he doesn't necessarily fully go away. I'm not too sure if we see that suit reoccur, but it wouldn't surprise me if it does come up in the last 12 issues.
Yeah, I take Powers removing the character here not as any forward indication that they've only got 16 issues, they've only got 12 issues left.
Yeah, I don't think they know at this point.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think like 8 months from now they know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, Powers is trying to create stakes, so if the Baroness is cutting a swath through some newer or minor characters, like Scalpel, if she sort of like sacrifices not with killing, but, Major Blood just gets arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And so he, in some ways, is taken off the board. And, Powers or the next writer could always just write a line that says, but he escaped. And that does happen in this story, right? Who is it who has just escaped?
Tomax, is it?
Okay, thank you. Also, Wraith does get an action figure in 2008. So, and this was just a regular figure, right? This wasn't only for the club or only for the convention.
I think there was a standard release, and then maybe it was a more exclusive invisible figure or something got released as well.
Right. Okay. And also Crocmaster, right? So Baroness seems to kill Crocmaster.
Yeah.
And I generally don't think you should kill characters. Looking back, knowing there are only 16 or 12 issues left, I think it's okay to kill characters. And they're trying to raise the stakes for what will end up being a big final story. How do you feel about Destro's turn here? Because he starts, there's this powerful scene where he finally brings Alexander, his son, in, and then immediately, Mark,
drops him like he's hot. He gets a phone call, and then he's away, sort of leaving Destro for dust, leaving Alexander for dust.
So I thought the scene where Destro finally brings him in was good, and then the scene where he's convinced to drop him was really powerful. I thought that so few pages happened between the two that it felt a little bit gimmicky, and I wish those could have been spread out more. But it does speak to how motivated Baroness and how powerful Cobra Commander are here, and I think the sort of the blackmail of it all in the final chapter, that Cobra Commander is, we've seen him occasionally shoot someone in this continuity and in others, and you and I always sort of take a breath at that. He is the most dangerous man on Earth in the world of G.I. Joe, even if he tends to be defeated and just talk to his mad scientist a lot.
There's that moment where he shoots that Cobra Trooper at the very last point in these 4 issues, for sort of questioning him, and they it's not something we really see much of from this Cobra Commander. It sort of reminds me a little bit more of the Action Force Cobra Commander, or Baron Ironblood, who was a little bit too readily a little bit who would he would kind of shoot down his own soldiers at the drop of the hat without much real triggering required. So it is more unusual for this Cobra Commander to be quite that bloodthirsty, quite that ruthless, and I guess it sort of fresh in our mind, as well as the killing of the 2 Cobras as they were being selected for the Plague Squad, in that last story that we read in Special Missions, The Enemy, as well.
Yeah, I thought that final page, I sort of wondered why this one random Cobra soldier or officer would question Cobra Commander. I know it needed to be somebody, and I don't think I want it to be, Zorana or Dr. Mindbender, but I did wonder, have we seen Cobra Commander talking to this one Cobra soldier at all in this story? No, I don't think so. And he doesn't have a scar or an eye patch, so he's not any one specific Cobra soldier. He's just the one who happens to feel cocky enough to question Cobra Commander. So I feel like in that scene, I feel like a little bit of sort of the mechanics of Mark Powers' writing reveals itself here. I need someone to ask Cobra Commander this question so Cobra Commander can explain it and then do something awful. But I don't feel that it's quite earned that it's this particular Cobra character, but also that is someone who Cobra Commander could just shoot. So I thought the general note that the story ends on is good, but it did make me scratch my head a little bit.
Yeah. Returning to that sort of point about Destro as well, I think it's an interesting point because they've had this sort of somewhat fractious sort of bouncing each other heads together kind of relationship where that Alexander came in as a bit of a usurper. They've had a kind of on and off relationship where they're kind of in the ups and downs, but that reconciliation, and then Destro's sort of dropping him and going to his true heir of his baby with Baroness, I guess speaks somewhat to the fragility of that relationship still, that even if he's acknowledged Alexander as heir, it's perhaps a slightly an unwilling acknowledgement or a hesitant acknowledgement.
Yeah, I have never loved Alexander as a character. I think that he gets what happens to him in the final part of the story is really interesting. So I'm glad something gets done with him, and then I'm glad that what's his lady's name? Is that Armada?
Uh-huh.
He gets manipulated twice by his father and by his wife or lover.
Paramour, let's say.
Thank you. I do want to point out, while Destro is going to great lengths, and I just want to actually say it out loud because I've been tiptoeing around it. Cobra Commander is blackmail, and Destro's sort of turn at the end. It's all quite powerful. The actual bit of dialogue where he says, you can have it all, Cobra Commander. Just protect my son. And then Baroness says, what are you doing? And he says, this is all that matters. Mm-hmm. I thought those two bits were great. But also a few pages away from that, he fires his wrist rockets, very close to Cobra Commander and a couple Joes to freeze them all into pausing their action.
Mm-hmm.
And Destro doesn't know that his baby is in one of those walls. And so a couple pages later, when Cobra Commander says, let me just push this button and reveal this little like crib in the wall that has a mobile of Cobra logos for the baby to look up at. And I thought, oh man, I'm so glad that Destro didn't blow up that part of the wall a couple pages ago when he was trying to get everyone to stand down. And in a different version of the scene, I think Destro might say to Cobra Commander, you know, you madman, you hid my baby in a wall? I was just shooting up the place. And then Cobra Commander might say, you madman, why are you shooting up the place? I might be hiding a baby in the wall.
And so part of that standoff and that agreement they come to is that Cobra Commander is given Alexander, is like, you only need one heir. You've already get, you know, you're getting the baby. You don't need another child, which is a little bit mad. And the fact that he agrees and can, you know, hand him over like a little, you know, like a piece of property is quite bonkers. But you can also see it working, that given the fragility of their relationship, Cobra Commander could quite easily say to him, well, he gave you over like you were nothing. And he's like, yes, my father betrayed me. I will join you, Cobra Commander. That kind of thing.
Yes, it sets up, there's the potential for a continuing evolution of this dynamic.
Should we talk about the Baroness's treatment by the US government and G.I. Joe?
Is it specifically the scene where Hawk is explaining to the Joes what's been happening, and then Hawk talks to this other general, and the other general says, what about enhanced...
Is it Hawk or is it...
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes. Was I saying Hawk earlier in the episode? It's Colton.
I don't know.
Hawk is not in this story. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, everyone. I've been saying Colton. Here are 3 takes of me saying Colton, so you can splice those in. Ready? Colton. Colton? Colton. Okay. Do we know specifically who gives the approval to hide the Baroness, not let her see her child, and not tell the Joes? In this story, it's described as someone higher up than Colton.
Yeah, so I guess it's Gibbs is given her, so he's been established as one of the jugglers. And then there's this other sort of plump, bald military chap who, you know, you get the impression that he's a military higher up, sort of telling them what to do. And then I guess ultimately is placed in the rock under Colton's charge. So, yeah, while it might not have been necessarily his decision completely, he's obviously he's, you know, definitely involved and somewhat culpable for the, you know, treatment that happens. You know, everyone's got choices that they can make, even if those are not easy choices.
So to answer your question, what do I think of the Baroness's treatment at the hands of the U.S. government? I think it's not good, but the story gives sort of our heroes an out, because it wasn't Shipwreck and Stalker and Duke that did that, and it wasn't Colton. It was someone else. It was someone higher up. It was someone, you know, kind of bad. It was someone maybe compromised. And so the story gets to have it both ways, that this evil character is sort of mistreated and punished, and maybe we want that, you know, to give in to our worst desires, but also the heroes come out clean.
Yeah, and even Colton, you know, has got some backbone. He's standing up to this general. This general is encouraging them to, you know, ratchet up things a gear, sort of do full on torture essentially. And Colton says, "What you're suggesting is something no real soldier would ever condone. This is G.I. Joe. We're better than that. Fine, Colton, have it your way. Until she starts spilling, she doesn't see the child. Let her rot here for as long as it takes." So it's kind of that higher up who's, you know, calling the shots to some degree and you know, inflicting it on Joe, on the Joes in terms of what's happening on their location. But yeah, as you say, they're most of them are blissfully unaware and are definitely taken aback by the treatment. And there's that sequence with Stalker talking to his wife and sort of, you know, questioning what's going on and saying that, you know, he can he can sort of sympathize with what the approach that she's taking, essentially.
Yeah, that page is another good example of Mark Powers balancing a lot of different needs of the story and maybe like wishes for the reader. Like, okay, well, at the end of the story, Cobra Commander is going to threaten 3 Joes because he knows where their family are. And that might feel like it's been a while. Like, when did Cobra Commander get chased out of, the White House when he was in disguise? Like, oh, well, an issue and a half ago, we see Stalker talking to his wife back in, their civilian life. And so that's a helpful reminder. I wanted to ask an art thing. On the very first page of this story, you point out that this is Crocmaster, and that's version 2. This is a figure that was released in 2005 in a 2-pack with Bomb Strike. Who are these other guys?
Let's hover over Crocmaster. So, as you remember, Crocmaster, the original Crocmaster, died on Cobra Island in the freighter that, along with all of those other people, some of whom stayed dead and some of whom didn't. But
you're talking about the Marvel run.
Yeah,
the landlocked freighter.
Exactly. Same continuity.
Larry Hama kills off Crocmaster. I had forgotten.
Yeah, but on the card for this particular character, it does say, after the original Crocmaster perished in the freighter during the Cobra Civil War, a succession of new individuals have assumed the mantle. It's not easy to maintain a grip on the position, with hungry Crocs on one side and power-hungry trainees on the other, both waiting for the first opportunity to turn on their master. So it's a nice way of having your cake and eating it, of having the character of Crocmaster and introducing a new design, and it's a nice design, but as well also acknowledging the continuity that has come before. So tip of the hat to that being deftly done. The other characters on this page, in the green with the sort of the silver kind of motorbike type masks, are Jungle Vipers, who were released in 2005 via the G.I.Joe Collectors Club. And one of the and the first page did have an I Spy for me. Sir, look, we're close. Made me think of Star Wars. Look, sir, droids.
Oh, yeah, but instead of picking up a washer or a gear, he picks up something else that's round. That's going to remind us of the Baroness. Okay, yes, Jungle Viper, 2005. One more Mike Baer art thing on the inside front cover of this first issue, and all 4 of these issues, new headshots, where we have the data desk sort of computer readout of who's in the active roster.
Very good.
I spy with my little eye.
I've got a few sort of I Spies, some of which is related to the plot. Cobra Commander talks to Snake Eyes, reminding him of his betrayal, and he says to him, "You've grown weak, brother." It made me go, what? What are you talking about there? Brother? This is a callback to Snake Eyes Declassified, where they had, it was that Snake Eyes and Cobra Commander road trip issue where they were like buddy guys on an adventure together for a year or whatever it was. So they've, in this continuity, in the Snake Eyes Declassified story that Mark Powers edited and helped kind of shape, Cobra Commander and Snake Eyes have this history together.
That's a good reminder. I have one, issue 23, chapter 3 of this story, on page 15. We see the Joe's stealth jet, and very, very small in 2 panels, we see its pilot, Ghost Rider, and this is definitely not a Larry Hama G.I. Joe script, because there isn't a gag where 1 or 2 of the Joes forget his name or sort of refer to him without referring to his name, because, of course, Marvel owns the copyright trademark. One of them is ownership, one of them is right to publish, I forget. But Marvel can make a comic called Ghost Rider, where those two words are on the cover, and no one else can put those two words on a cover. So Hasbro can have a toy called Ghost Rider, and while Marvel's making a Ghost Rider comic, Devil's Due could probably just call someone casually in one panel of one page Ghost Rider, and I don't think Marvel would have a problem. But you certainly can't have that name called out on a G.I. Joe cover. And so Hama expanded the joke a little bit, not just that in a Marvel comic in the 80s and 90s, no one was going to say his name, but that they specifically could never remember his name, that he's sort of so forgettable. And here, Spirit and Snake Eyes don't refer to him, but it's very small, but you can see that the cockpit has 3 seats. So he flies them from point A to point B.
Vietnam.
Thank you.
And the cockpit, the plane has 3 seats, unlike the toy, which has 2, to call that out specifically. We've got the return of Wilder Vaughan, who was the leader of the Red Shadows from a good few issues ago now. I guess in continuity terms, we've not seen him for almost 2 years, given that this is, into issue 23 or whatever it is where he appears. So I wasn't necessarily expecting to see him because I couldn't remember that aspect. But yeah, interesting that he makes a return. We have also got the return of Colonel Sharif, who has made a few appearances in the world of G.I. Joe before. He was in issue 1, the hot potato story, as the villain there.
Oh, Marvel issue 1.
Mm-hmm. Back in 1982. He was then appeared once more in issue 58, when Dusty and Mainframe are giving support to a Middle Eastern country that they are supporting forces loyal to a deposed emir against the new ruler of the country, which is Colonel Sharif. And finally, there is an appearance in Special Missions number 3, which is that issue with, I think he's called Deke, who is an American pilot who is working on behalf of Sharif. So this is another appearance of that fella.
I've got one in the final chapter in issue 24 on page 10. Snake Eyes communicates.
Mm-hmm.
There are 2 things happening here. Snake Eyes uses sign language. He makes a gesture with his hands, and Spirit Iron Knife translates for Blackout and for us. And he says that Snake Eyes is saying one word, traitor. And my very quick internet search does tell me that is about half of the... If you could only draw it in one panel, that's the second half of the hand gesture that makes traitor in ASL. But what's more interesting to me that's happening here, not that Snake Eyes is frowning or taunting at Blackout, and maybe this is where you take a sentence, Mark, and remind us about Blackout and how Mark Powers is bringing in a character from before.
So Blackout was a key character in Brandon Jerwa's run, sort of midway through the last series of G.I. Joe, where he and his brother were both, his brother being Barrel Roll, with both on the G.I. Joe team, but Blackout kind of washed out of the team essentially and turned heel, joined Cobra.
So the other interesting thing that's happening here is that Snake Eyes is communicating, and Snake Eyes has only communicated a few times up to this point in the combined, in the present day, in the combined Marvel and Devil's Due continuity. And something that's interesting about the character is that even in flashbacks, when he can speak, he tends not to. And in the present day, when he can write things or do hand gestures or sign in American Sign Language or Morse code, he very infrequently does. I think it's like 4 times in the entire Marvel Devil's Due combined. So I have decided that it's not just that Snake Eyes can't talk, it's that he doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't quite know sort of what Larry Hama's intention was with that over many issues before this and in a different continuity many issues after this. But it has this really powerful effect because you have a character like Scarlet who just knows what he's thinking, or whatever he's thinking, she's okay with it. And then you have this sort of loyalty from Snake Eyes to all the other Joes and from all the other Joes to Snake Eyes. And I think this moment in the Devil's Due world is big enough to perhaps merit this sort of once every so often, like kind of breaking the silence of Snake Eyes not speaking. It adds some heft to the betrayal of Blackout. But it really jumped out at me because we almost never see Snake Eyes communicate. You know, like he does in I think he does in Marvel issue 4. Isn't he scouting Vance Wingfield's camp? He's got binoculars and he's like writing something on a pad. And isn't there like a hand gesture in Marvel issue 1 where like Scarlet sort of translates for him? She's like, oh, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few if we're going to go on this crazy Lady Doomsday mission. And on top of this, after Spirit translates for Snake Eyes, Blackout's reaction gets an entire wordless panel that's more than a third of the page. So Powers gives this scene, this moment, this exchange, a lot of room to breathe. And you sort of, because we're used to stories going like a certain direction, I've sort of expected Blackout to then like smack Snake Eyes across the face, or to hit him with his gun, or to just shoot him, or to make a direct threat. Like, do that again, captive, and I'll shoot you in the face. And Blackout thinks about it. And then he says to the other Cobra soldier, get them on their feet. The commander wants to see them. Which in some ways might be worse. You know, like whatever the commander's going to do, it's worse. I can, however angry Blackout is, he's not overstepping here. So I found this page, you know, like part of me is like, Mark Powers, you're not Larry Hama. You didn't do the Ghost Rider joke. Snake Eyes doesn't sign. And then I thought, well, maybe this comic doesn't want a Ghost Rider joke. And maybe Powers wants Snake Eyes to do something a little unusual because this story is building.
So what else did I notice as a nice buy? The first appearance of the name Anastasia Sisanova in issue 22, which is the name that she goes by in the new Skybound continuity, and as introduced in the pages of Duke. She is also referred to in these same issues as Anastasia de Cobre, which is the kind of the name that we are more familiar with. So I got the impression that there's a slight hint that maybe Sisanova is an alias, that if Joe have the right intel based on her birth name and her parentage, etc., maybe Anastasia Sisanova is the name that she goes by at university or whatever when she knows this guy that she meets in Prague. Although curiously, Wilder Vaughan also calls her the same name as well. So perhaps it is an adopted name.
You had a little bit of a quest on the Talking Joe Facebook page, Mark, to track down either the origin of or the first appearance of this name.
Yep, I think it was Greg who solved the mystery. He's got a good memory for these kind of things. So we hadn't quite got to this issue at the point that question raised itself. If we had been a little bit further ahead in our Devil's Due reread, I would have probably remembered. But there we go.
So this isn't quite an I Spy, but issue 21, the first chapter of this 4-part story, has 2 visual flashbacks which refer to very specific Marvel moments, or I guess somewhat specific Marvel moments. On page 5, there's a flashback to the Baroness in Marvel issue 95, but the timeline is a little bit vague here. That Baroness has a brother, and her brother died, so that's that flashback in the Snake Eyes trilogy. And then also on the same page at the bottom, when you see that the Baroness has now been sort of fully taken over by terrorism and evil. She is in her Marvel issue number 1 costume, which is, blue The Baroness has a similar look in the first 5-part animated miniseries. Baroness here is in her sort of 1984 Ron Rudat costume. Her pre-black leather with the red logo costume. Speaking of the Baroness, I wanted to ask you, Mark, to help remind me and listeners. In the final chapter of this story on page 13, Flint is handcuffed, and in front of everyone, Baroness kisses him and sneaks him the key to the handcuffs. And I thought, okay, they've kissed before, and this is in issue 19 of the previous Devil's Due series, the one with no subtitle that comes before America's Elite, and it's in the Josh Blaylock run. And can you just remind us sort of what the Flint Baroness chemistry is or isn't?
I think in that story they were sort of captured and held together, and there was a little bit of chemistry, and I think that she kissed him in front of Lady J to kind of wind them up and plant a little bit of a seed of mistrust, a little bit mischievous, and I guess this plot point here is kind of playing on that slight hint of is there chemistry, isn't there, but also she's trying to she's obviously using that kiss to drop him something that he can use to escape his handcuffs in this particular plot point, because she's now doing it in front of her partner, the Destro.
Right. And all right, so that issue is from 4 years earlier, that issue 19, and them kissing makes the cover of that issue, though it's an exaggeration of the scene.
I thought when you were talking about the flashback in issue 21, which includes Baroness in her A Real American Hero issue 1 blue costume with yellow highlights, I thought you might talk about a different kind of flashback that they had as well, when they're looking at the footage of the hospital raid where Baroness's son was taken, which is the story that we just recently covered in Special Missions The Enemy.
Hey, there's that nurse draped over the window.
At the time, we noticed that there was a shape sort of going through the window, and there we are. It's the same. It's the same one. There's a nurse hanging out the window and showing a little bit more, I guess, explicitly here that it's less of a hint of a body there, that you not entirely clear what the shape is, and now it's definitively a nurse hanging out the side of a observation window into the maternity ward or whatever it was.
All right, this is the bottom of page 7 in issue 21.
There's another moment there, sort of harkening, and it's sort of following up on the intent of that story, which was that I think it's Colton who's talking. He says there was only one survivor, the Baroness's child, who was abducted. And then Scarlet says, "You mean they killed even the..." My God, this is Cobra we're talking about. So the implications there of what Scarlet is not saying, they killed even the... My God, they killed everyone in the hospital, which includes all of those other children in the maternity ward, which Mike O'Sullivan wanted to be part of that story, but was not allowed to explicitly say.
So if you imply it twice, the audience will really get it.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't talked about Jean-Francois Beaulieu's colors on this arc. He colors quite aggressively, but he's coloring with more hard edges and less painterly rendering.
Yeah, you don't get like the sort of the modern computerized gradient rendering. It looks, in places, it kind of looks quite analog, like sort of almost watercolors or something like that. But yeah, there's in terms of the way that he does use sort of color on color, it's quite often blocks of color rather than trying to sort of smooth things out too much. I do like it. I think I like his coloring a lot. I think it's the strongest coloring that we've seen on a G.I. Joe book from Devil's View thus far, really.
Yeah, and it also it elevates Mike Baer's art in two ways. One, Beaulieu isn't creating too much busyness, and so for Baer's art, for him, getting better at this as he goes and being a young new professional. I don't mean to damn by faint praise that we have seen not great color art on good art and the not great art in Devil's Due books. This very good color art, for not being bad color art, doesn't ruin the art, which is not a nice way to say a compliment. But if you look at the opening scene of this, the first couple pages in the jungle with Crocmaster and the Jungle Vipers and the Baroness, Beaulieu is almost cell shading. These yellow highlights on Crocmaster, on the Baroness when they're both firing their weapons, and he does a nice job of changing colors from one scene to the next. So the opening scene in this whole comic, there's a lot of green, and then you turn the page, and hey, there's a vamp. There is a G.I. Joe vehicle.
There we go.
Outside the headquarters of the Joes at the Rock. That scene that's a certain kind of daylight, that's hazy yellow. And then the next panel, underground in the Rock, lit by a big table computer screen, all the Joes are underlit with blue light. And those scenes, there's just like 3 blues, and that's it. So, the green of Colton's shirt and the dark green of his jacket and the blue of Shipwreck, they're just all the same blue 1, blue 2, or blue 3 in this scene. And this kind of color treatment continues where from one scene to the next, where that one page where Stalker is talking to his wife outside of their house, that is a different yellow than that one panel with a vamp outside the Rock, though it's similar. It's more of a mustard yellow and less of a, hazy, slightly green yellow. And then when Alexander is doing physical therapy, Beaulieu's trying to make those fluorescent lights look like fluorescent lights, and fluorescent lights cast slightly green light. So, for not having an inker for the last 3 chapters of this story, Beaulieu's colors do a lot of work in sort of maintaining that graphical balance and some of the heft of Baer's pencils, and so it's really nice coloring. It is a little more aggressive than my preference. I do like fewer colors and simpler color choices, but if you're going to do modern comics with Photoshop, this is, if you're going to do that modern style, if it's, if you're going to squint and it might look like an issue of X-Men in 2022 or 2007, I think this is a really handsome approach.
Definitely agreed.
I want to make a quick comparison in some Mike Baer storytelling. Two panels that work and 2 panels that almost work. In issue 22, on pages 12 and 13, Baroness is at this club, and by the bar it's all blue, and then out on the sort of floor where people are seated at tables and there's a DJ booth, that's all red. So there's a panel at the bottom of page 12 where the Baroness is looking up at the DJ booth, and you see the back of the Baroness's head. And then on the next page, on the last panel, the Baroness is up in the DJ booth and she's got a gun to the DJ. And you know that it's the DJ booth because he has long hair and there are a bunch of records behind him, vinyl records. And I thought, okay, these 2 panels and the storytelling of these 2 pages, they're like 90% of the way there, where the camera angles make sense and the visual storytelling makes sense. And I don't want any dialogue or narration where the Baroness is like, where's the DJ? I have to go find him because I can make a phone call from the DJ booth and lure out Wraith, who's down there. I'm going to walk by him and go upstairs to the DJ booth. So I don't want that all explained in words. And I do like the storytelling here. But I do feel like if you're reading it a little quickly, if you've never been to a dance club with a DJ booth that's higher up and looking down, if you miss that it's the Baroness who you're seeing the back of her head on the bottom of page 12, you might miss this story thread that the Baroness is calling, and she's holding a phone at the very bottom of page 13 in her left hand, but it's a little hard to see. So I do think that this 2-page scene in the dance club in Prague, nightclub, is well done. I do think it could be even clearer. Mm-hmm. And then the other comparison that I wanted to make was this one is simpler. I like how this one works. On pages 7 and 8 of issue 24, the final chapter, there's this little scene. There's a panel at the bottom of page 7 and a panel at the top of page 8 where the two Joes are reunited with the other Joe, and they're in front of this charter jet, this private jet. And someone, I don't think we know who it is. I'm just going to say Vincent Price because of his mustache and his sort of long nose and impressive eyebrows. Here's my Vincent Price impression. They're coming. Someone sees the Joes heading into the brush away from the jet. And on the bottom of page 7, he puts his finger to his ear and he says, they're coming. And then on the top of page 8, the Baroness is having this standoff with Destro and Cobra Commander in Cobra Commander's circular headquarters control room. And the Baroness says, you surprise me, Commander. But she's pulling her hair back with her left hand over her ear to reveal an earpiece in her ear. So she's hearing Vincent Price telling her that those two Joes or those three Joes or the Joe that she tied up, whichever it is, are on their way, and that the scene in this circular control room with Cobra Commander and Destro is about to get more complex. And, you could add a little bit and make this even clearer. Vincent Price's dialogue could be like, Madam, and then on the second panel in a like radio squawk word balloon, like pointing to the earpiece, he could continue, they're coming or they're approaching. And whereas I think that the previous example at the nightclub in Prague is clear but could be clearer, and it's not a fair comparison because there's a lot less going on in this one. I do think that this is a nice sort of parallel where you get this horizontal panel on the bottom of 7 and this horizontal panel on the top of 8. He's touching his right ear, she's touching her left ear. And it just shows how in control the Baroness is, that she's juggling these two things. She's dealing with Cobra Commander and Destro live in front of her, and she's also getting intel in her ear.
Very good. So I think we've probably done talking about this issue, so we can sum up and score it. I really liked it. I thought the writing was really strong. I thought the art looked great. From the penciler, inker team, the colours really strong, really satisfying story, as I say, sort of fitting in with what came before, giving us a solid 4-parter in itself and leading us forward to what comes next. A really good grasp on the characters, juggling quite a large number of characters, scenes, locations, but not having it feeling overcrowded. This is about as, I think, just about as good as we've had it at Devil's Due. So really, really strong. So with all of those superlatives, maybe I go with a 10. Do I go with a 10, Tim?
Wow. Am I waiting for you to decide?
No, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to leave it there. Why not? I think if something's really good, you should be allowed to sort of acknowledge that it's good. We never give that scores that high, but let's leave it as a landmark. This is a really good, strong issue, strong story, strong creative team. Why not?
For all of the same reasons that you pointed out, I'm going to give this a 7, which for me is very high for Devil's Due. I take a little bit off for no inker on 3 of the issues, and as good as Mike Bair is coming right out of school with clear storytelling, good drawings of people and weapons, and a little bit of vehicles. I do need more oomph in my action comics, my superhero adjacent comics, and I do think that the covers of parts 3 and 4 are fine, but feel very much like those sort of okay Devil's Due covers that we have seen many of. But points for the 2 covers at the beginning of the story. I think that in terms of my sort of test for a G.I. Joe story or a comic, could I give this story, could I give this issue to a comics fan, to a G.I. Joe fan, like a lapsed G.I. Joe fan? I don't think I would get around to giving this G.I. Joe story to a lapsed Joe fan when there are lots of other satisfying G.I. Joe stories that either are the beginnings of things or are self-contained. So I just want to acknowledge that this is in the middle of a run. But if a Joe fan said to me, hey, I haven't read Americas Elite, or hey, when was the Devil's Due era at its peak? I could point to this.
Interesting. I had a couple of just minor final observations. No letters pages for these 4 issues.
Boo.
I'm not, don't know entirely why that would be, but there is an advert for Storm Shadow issue 1, which is launching at this time as a new ongoing series. I'm sure this one will run and run and run.
There's also an issue for Storm Shadow 2 and 3.
Oh yeah, well, indeed, yeah.
Across these 4 issues.
So that's celebrating the launch of the new series from Larry Hama as the writer, and for at least issue 1, Mark Robinson on art, with covers by Sean Murphy, aka Sean Gordon Murphy. So yeah, doubtless we'll be covering this at some point in the future. But it is a little bit of an anachronism in terms of it is very much Larry's series doing his own thing and very, very much to the side of the rest of the continuity. So I don't really consider it as part of the Devil's Due era because it is just so removed from the rest of the continuity.
Yes, I believe Hama has said he counts it as a part of his Real American Hero continuity.
Yeah, even though you do have to really squint to see it, there is some connective tissue there.
Were there some other little bits?
That was it. I'm done.
I have one last bit. The last page and the inside back cover of the final issue of this 4-part story, Sins of the Mother, is a 2-page ad for the next big 12-part arc in G.I. Joe Americas Elite. There's no art here. It's not a close-up of the number 13. It's not a close-up of Cobra Commander's face. The camera isn't slowly pulling back over 3 months of slightly revealing ads. There's no artwork here. It's just graphics. It's just graphical text. It's a green stripe, a white stripe, and a green stripe, and it says, "A story 2 years in the making. A conflict of unprecedented levels." The copywriter in me has a note on that one. "The threat G.I. Joe was created for. World War III. Starting in issue 25. A 12-part story. Coming July." So that's a nice tease for, because if there was a letters page, they'd say, "Folks, we've got a great story coming up over the next 12 months. Be back here in 4 weeks for..." Was the first part double-sized? I can't remember. And, they'd say something like, "Didn't Mark Powers do a great job on this 4-part story? Didn't Mike Bair do a great part on this 4-part story? Oh man, Baroness sure got her baby back," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And though I always want a letters page, if you're going to not have a letters page, this is the way to bridge the next issue with a big, bold ad and a 2-page ad at that.
Very good. So I think we're done with this issue. Next time on Talking Joe Disavowed, we will continue our look at the America's Elite era of G.I. Joe as World War III commences. So we will, I imagine, do similar to this, 4 issues at a time, and take 3 bites at it to cover the 12 issues. Back over at the regular shows, in present day, We will continue to cover ARA from Larry Hama as it comes out, and also the Energon Universe from Skybound. You can find Talking Joe in the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website that links to those places, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. We are also on Patreon, patreon.com/talkingjoe. So a big thanks to all of our backers: Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Shane, Ryan, Simon, Chris, Joe, Craig, Frank, and our newest member, Mike, who are all getting early access to episodes, as well as some exclusive content. At the time of recording, there's something like 5-ish episodes in our back catalogue that have yet to be released to the general public. So there we go. More great stuff there. Tim, where can people find you when you are not talking to me about G.I. Joe?
I produce video essays on television and film at youtube.com Atomic Abe Productions, youtube.com/Atomic Abe Productions. My brick and mortar comic book store is in Somerville, Massachusetts, Hub Comics. You never know who'll drop by. G.I. Joe artist Billy Penn, who drew issue 287, stopped by my store this week. And I write about G.I. Joe at my blog, arealamericanbook.com.
And keep watching the skies for that Real American Book at some point in the future for too very long. So, I think that is us done for now. But until next time, remember that...
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast!
Laters.